to,
Do you have her up on your speaker here?
yeah, I got her up. Yeah. Great. Okay. Here we go, people.
Just like you, give me conversations, good vibrations. So come on, baby, let me show some signs. Why you wanna dance so bad? We don't have to take our clothes off. Oh, have a good time. Oh, no, we could dance all night, and we should carry on. We don't.
Oh, America! Are you serious? It is showtime, baby! Here we go! Ram, jam, slam, bam! It's awesome, baby! 360 Mindset, sharing skills and drills wrapped by stories from elite performers and your favorite sports pro. So take your first step. Speak your first word with a foundation of positive thought that comes from 360 Mindset and your host, Coach Whiteman. Whoa, Whiteman. Let's get started. No excuses and no regrets.
Okay, we're getting started, and that's well, we always start every Friday with a big breath to get ourselves focused. And the backdrop is the one song I've loved for a long, long time. Because when things get tough and you're challenged, regardless of how talented you are, sometimes it feels like there's no place to go and no place to hide. And you need some support from people that surround you. And today we've got some great, great people around us helping us get through the day and face it in ways that optimize our performance. And I'm here now, Chris. I've looked at Italian a lot, and I know what the C is and CH is, but when I've got a C and a CH in the name, do I go hard sound, soft sound? So I would say it's Chris Macchiarola, or is it Macchiarola?
It really depends on whom you ask in my husband's family, but it's the way that I pronounce it is Macchiarola, but there are some family members that say it exactly how you said it.
All right.
But Chris Mack is much easier.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Easy for everybody.
Yes, Chris Mack is definitely much easier. I am so glad that you're with me today, especially with what we're going to talk about, which is something that's close and near and dear to your mind and heart, and that's vulnerability. And
Yes, it is.
you know, I've said that word in mixed gender audiences and gotten a different feedback, both verbal and nonverbal, because people typically, just the general scope of things, when you say the word vulnerable, there's a weakness attached to it, and
Yes.
I don't agree with that, and I'm sure you don't, and that's why you're here, because I want to give your perspective to our highly competitive audience, since we talk about sports as a metaphor for performance, as well as the executive boardroom. And so vulnerability, tell me a little bit about, from your perspective, what does vulnerability mean contextually for you and what you do?
You know, I think what the point that you just made about how many times it can be associated with weakness very much resonates with me. And I would have probably 2 years ago been right in line with that thinking. And, didn't discover Brene Brown, who's one of my heroes, until about a year ago, really, has really done a ton of work in the area of vulnerability. But it is something that people don't like to necessarily talk about when it relates to themselves, but they are drawn to it in others. And because when we talk about vulnerability with ourselves, we really think of it as weakness. But it is something that we find endearing in others when they're able to embrace it, talk about it in a very transparent way, and then show that they've been resilient despite their vulnerabilities. And so what draws us in with others, we hate in ourselves, which is a fascinating one.
Well, and then what you just said, I mean, you say it in a different way. The way I've presented it to executives many times is you surround yourself with the peoples that complement your weakness. But to do that, you've got to open up.
It requires shedding layers and digging deep and doing the hard work and self-awareness and the courage to admit, hey, I may not have all the answers. I might need some help. I might need to surround myself with really smart people that are able to help me compensate for those areas of opportunity.
Well,
but that takes courage.
Well, and a couple other words I want to throw in there with the word courage that I throw around, and you too as well, I'm going to guess, is humility, integrity, and transparency. Now, as I say that, I'm going to remind our audience that you know that when I say a word, I use it because I practice it, or I teach how to practice it, rather than just being a provider of more buzzwords, more buzz phrases. I want to make sure that we're purposeful with our intent when we speak.
Right.
So humility has a specific reference for me as it relates to what you were talking about with regarding vulnerability. So let me give you, in our setup here, we do our first segment. It's on mindset. So let's talk a little bit about how do you believe vulnerability resides in a courageous warrior mind, in particular a woman's mind, a courageous-minded woman? Where does it sit in their schematic, in their makeup?
I think the women that I admire most and that are the most courageous are the ones that are willing to admit you can be strong and powerful, but you can't necessarily do everything on your own. We have sometimes this feeling that we need to be all powerful, never ask for help, be the best, have these strong walls up that we feel like they protect us and make us stronger. In reality, they don't. And so the women that I admire the most are willing to admit that, hey, I may not have all the answers. I can ask for help, and that is a sign of strength. And strength in recognizing that there's power in numbers. Other people have wisdom they can share, that you can always learn from somebody else's story, and that's how you learn and grow. If you think that you have it all figured out all the time, that's a wall, that's a block, and that is going to prevent you from being your best you.
Now, Chris, as you know, in the conversations we've had, I'm looking for answers to my inclusion and my words when I get included within the environments that are more feminine driven than masculine. So do I get to be included? And how do I get included with those women warriors who are vulnerable, want to be vulnerable, but realize I need help? Does it include men in the helping?
Yes, it does. It's interesting. I've had this conversation a couple times. Just from my own perspective, sometimes what happens is really strong women, and this might be a little bit out there, but I'll try to make as much sense as I can. We try to portray this strength and this fierceness and this power, and we are overcompensating sometimes with this masculine energy, this masculine part of our personalities. And really, we all have masculine and feminine, whether you're a man or a woman, right? As part of our energy that makes up our personality and how we show up in the world. And you really want them to be in balance. And so sometimes when we are out of balance, and sometimes people who perceive themselves to be really strong are overcompensating with that masculine side, we are afraid as women to allow the men in our lives to help us, to be a part of that conversation. And I've been one of those women, and I can tell you it's something that I'm self-aware of now, and working towards being better, being more balanced in that respect. But it's not easy always for me to ask for help or accept help, especially from the men in my life, my husband, former bosses, co-workers, good friends. And it's not that I don't appreciate where it's coming from, but it just comes from this place of, I can handle it, I'm strong, I can do this, I don't need your help. And there's nothing wrong with asking or accepting help. And part of this is being able to have that conversation with the men in our lives and say, hey, I recognize this about myself. I'm doing better. And when I tell you I don't need help, Please don't take it personally. This is me.
Yeah.
This is not you. You bring value to this, and I'm going to try to be more self-aware and see ways that I can include you.
So that sounds like there's some empathy in this discussion and dialogue between genders, that the man has to be empathetic about who he's talking to, what the context is, and the positioning of him with them, her or her, so that there's in that understanding, there's no diminishment of power or privilege between the two. So,
Yes.
so with that, let me ask you then, what are the things a woman in particular needs to be aware of to discover her power and personal growth with that power, and still be vulnerable and still open up to men and women for that matter?
Yeah, great question. I think if you are going to truly dig deep and understand what's underneath those layers, it has to start with giving yourself the gift of introspection. Having that solitude, that time alone where you can ask those deep questions and listen with intent and search for clarity. The problem is that we often don't give ourselves that gift because we are so busy as women. We are raising children. We want to have careers. We want to have hobbies. We want to be good wives. We want to do all of these things, and we're very activity centric. And it's very easy to not allow yourself to slow down and speed up and give yourself that time. So if you're not having those conversations with yourself where you are asking tough questions, giving yourself solitude, and not being afraid to find out what those answers are, you're never going to achieve that personal growth that you need to get because you're not giving yourself the time to find those answers.
Now, as a young woman, does being by yourself include your cell phone or not?
My cell phone?
Yeah. It's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek.
That should not be part of the equation.
Okay.
If you are, this should be technology-free zone. If you can connect with nature when you're doing it, I think that's can be really helpful. But even practicing yoga and meditation, a moving meditation, anything like that, deep breathing. But no, there should be no technology, no distractions. This is you being with yourself.
Well, and as I'm saying this, and I said, I did it with tongue in cheek, but you caught it, and we've got young people, you've got children you're around, and kids that are constantly with their thumbs doing their thing. They don't know how to be alone, and I don't know that a lot of adults know how to be alone in a solitude way, so that they're.
No, I completely agree.
So, so my professional athletes who are out there listening, and some of you are, because it's off season for some of you, remember, we talk about awareness to your environment and what skills, and our next segment is about skills. And we talk about skills that are about helping you maintain that mindset of solitude in this case, or touching your vulnerable places, and that didn't sound very good. Being vulnerable and discovering that vulnerability with a control and confidence. There are skills and exercise you can do, like meditation you mentioned, the breathing. I love the fact that you talked about moving meditation, because it takes away the stigma of, I got to sit down and have pillows and music and incense burning. And yes, those are all great things, but you could be walking through a park and experiencing a meditative state. The key is that I look at the five senses, Chris. I say, look at your five senses. Those are ways to bring yourself into practicing different skill sets. Like, take away your vision. Okay, you're in a park and you stop for a minute. Shut your eyes and let other senses take over. Your hearing, how you feel the weather and the temperature. So this is going quite well, Chris.
Good, I'm glad.
I'm liking where we're going with this. This is, and it brings me to my next question. That's again our bridge. We're getting about the not halfway, the quarter hour where we take a bit of a pause, but it's in setup for the skills section. And I want to give everybody a chance to know Chris a little bit better by asking you to tell everybody, how do they get in touch with Chris about her EQ work, her vulnerability work, just whatever they want to touch base with Chris on? How do they do that?
Yeah, I mean, a great way is to follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So I'm on LinkedIn, and that's probably one of the most active platforms for me. I'm on Facebook as well, but LinkedIn is a better place to reach me. Or my website is KMAC, KMACC, solutions with an S.com. So those are the two best ways to reach out to me.
Awesome. We'll restate those again and again and again, so you have it. And just a reminder, everybody, go to YouTube, look up 360 Mindset to take a look at this show. If you want to recall it or have a friend that you'd like to refer it to, you can have them look there. You can have them look on Facebook page, 360 Mindset Facebook page, and it's there. It sits there for a while, as well as KUHS Denver Facebook also has it. And if you're a fan of Ustream and the internet, you could Google this, Chris's name, my name, all of the names we mentioned, and get in touch with the messages that we're sharing for today. And with a continuation of those messages, we're going to talk a little bit about skills. Skills like breathing techniques, visualization, meditation. So with those skills, we're trying to hold on to the mindset we create and enhance or enrich it. So what are some activities that you recommend to people in support of uplifting their vulnerable mindset?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind for me that I discovered halfway through 2017, really, and I wish I would have discovered in my 20s, is yoga. To me, that is a place that you cannot lie. It's mind, body, soul on that mat, and whatever you are bringing, whatever mindset you are bringing that day to the mat will show up. And it will show up in your practice. And so it's a great way to do a self-check.
How do you
moving meditation? Oh, go ahead.
Chris, how do you get into clarifying your mind so that you can get to those really compromising positions? Like I love the pigeon pose, but if I have to do that right away, to get my knee and my calf under my chest, to then I may not get up again. But if I get clarity, clear my mind and really get everything. So how do you get clarity? How do you get your focus?
I think it comes down to connecting with your breath. So when you are intentional, I should say, about breathing, that is an exceptional way to just focus on being mindful, being present at that moment, and clearing the rest of that junk out of your head for that 90 minutes or 75 minutes or 60 minutes, whatever it is that you were practicing on the mat. And when you can bring it back to your breath and your intentions, what is it that you want to get out of that? Why are you there? Being grateful and coming at things from an abundance mindset, to me, is all very, very helpful in practicing yoga. And so it really is my therapy.
Now let me give some people some motivation for yoga, because I totally believe in it. I do yoga more than a few times a week, both formally and informally. It's kind of my way to break the stressor issues in my office. I'll get into a particular pose to enhance the breathing and the muscle and whatever. But here's the motivation. Imagine that you were 6'5", very tall, and you weighed close to or over 300 pounds. And yet, flexibility, speed of response of your limbs, hands, feet, legs, and so on, is essential. Have to maximize that speed. So flexibility becomes a huge challenge with that size and girth. So if you get a picture on a yoga mat of these bodies, these large bodies, and you see that amazingly they're able to do certain poses. I mean, downward dog, tree, infant pose, the egg. I mean, all of these different things that for some of us would look, oh, that's pretty easy. I can roll up into a ball and shake back and forth. I can do that. But that's 300 pounds. The room can only hold 4 of those people. They take up that much space. So if you're looking for reasons to stay away from yoga, this is a reason for why you should be challenged to go do yoga, because anybody can do it. But the key is, as Chris has said, is to give yourself a reason that motivates you for your reasons, not because someone told you to.
Yep.
So I have another question for you, Chris. You ready for a question?
Yep. Sure.
how would a man or a woman know they've discovered their vulnerability?
Oh. I can only speak from my experience. When you are truly honest and authentic with yourself about the things that terrify you, that you don't want to admit to the world, or not even the world, the people that are closest to you sometimes are the hardest people to admit those things that you just, honestly, it comes down to many times that you're shameful or fearful of. That is how you know you have hit that spot of vulnerability. And when you are allowing yourself to acknowledge that this is something that I'm fearful or shameful of, and I'm going to find a way to shed that layer, it can be absolutely liberating. First, there's terrifying phase, and then it becomes liberating. But it is terrifying. It absolutely is.
So what are some of your strategies, or I call them drills, exercises, that you would recommend to someone to overcome the fear, to get to that openness and that vulnerable place it's more enriching, it's more uplifting than the status of the fear?
Yeah, I think part of it comes from challenging yourself. So when you ask yourself a question, maybe there's something that you want to achieve, but you're listening to that voice inside your head that says, well, that's not something that I can do, that's something that other people do. Asking yourself, well, what's holding me back? Generally, the first answer is BS. It is generally not an honest answer that you are going to come with. So then you need to continue asking yourself that, is this really the answer? So I'll give you an example. When I decided to leave corporate America, and I was still pondering, could I make this happen? And I had a lot of fear and trepidation. The initial question I asked myself, okay, well, what's holding me back? Well, my first answer was, it's the golden handcuffs. I make a lot of money. I have a retirement plan with them. I get good vacation pay.
Yeah.
All of these things. That was not true. I mean, certainly there's a little part of that. Okay, so I'm like, meet with my financial planner. She says, you're fine to do this. And I still had the fear. So what really was, I had to keep asking and digging. And the real fear, when I asked the tough questions and was honest with myself, and it was a big epiphany for me, was the fear of being vulnerable, showing myself, my real self to the world. I now was going to start my own company. I did not have a big name company to hide behind.
Yeah.
So in essence, if I failed, fear of failure, fear of rejection, that was going to be a fear on me. I couldn't blame anybody else. I couldn't make any excuses. Oh, well, that's the company I worked for. No, that was going to be my failure that I had to own. And so then it became something more about, how do we define failure? How do we define success? And I will be the one to define that. I will not allow other people to define that.
So here's I think a good follow-up question to that, your story and how you attacked it. So I talked to, and you as well, talk to elite performers in the executive suite, and then I add to that the elite athlete, whether they be pro or amateur. So as an elite competitor, how could opening up to teammates or colleagues, family, improve one's performance, or in your case, improve that transition, help that transition move forward? What have you seen happen with people when you've helped them through that fear?
Yeah, so I'll take it from more of a leadership perspective. So when we're talking about leaders, the people that I think are transformational leaders are setting the tone for psychological safety with their team members by saying, hey, I don't have all the answers, and I'm not afraid of falling into the trap of imposter syndrome. And if you're not familiar with that term, what that means is I'm afraid people are going to find out I'm not as good as they think I am.
Yeah.
And so that's very common among, I would say, probably anyone who's performing at an elite level. They worry that, or anybody really, they worry that people are going to think they're not as good. They're going to find out I'm not as good. I'm not deserving of this position. When we are able to set the tone for psychological safety by letting others know that, hey, I may need some help. I may not have all the answers. I make mistakes sometimes. That sets the tone as a leader for people to be able to fail fast, to learn from it, to speak up when things aren't working, to seek help. So I don't have all the answers. You have some strategies that can help me. And when we do that, that sets the tone for and collaboration. When we don't do that, then people are they're afraid of persecution. They're not going to bring their best selves to work, because at the end of the day, we all want validation. This is not a psychologically safe place to do that.
Is there, some one-on-one with a boss or direct reports is a conversation that has a little bit more control than if you have a huge team, and you're hoping that everybody in the team creates that psychologically safe environment. What are the recommendations you make to leaders about communicating that message to the team in maintaining their role in maintaining the psychologically safe environment?
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to the concept of trust. So trust is fundamental on that human to human level, and it also comes down to self-awareness. So a lot of times we're not aware of the things that we do to either build or erode trust.
Yeah.
The only time that we think about our behavior in the context of trust is when somebody has eroded our trust. We want to be judged by our intentions, not necessarily our actions and our behaviors. And so when we can think about that intentionally and communicate that to the team, right, we are going to establish a culture of trust. And what that means, these are the things that we can do to build trust.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, we all erode trust, so let's acknowledge that. And if that happens, let's have those crucial conversations so we can repair it.
Yeah.
Which doesn't happen because people just, they make assumptions. It's easier not to confront it. All of those things. But when we can do that, that's when the team can start to create a judgment-free zone, which is so important, that psychological safety.
Yeah.
Where now we are being innovative and collaborative and work together.
Well, and
when we don't have that, it's unproductive, and a lot of walls go up, and people are disengaged. Their foot's halfway in the water, halfway out.
Yeah.
Because why would I put my best self to work when I'm not validated, appreciated?
Well, and sometimes there's judgments that may be valid and understood or accepted because it's my boss telling me, so I've got it. I think I have to take the judgment. But what bothers me is when there's retribution that follows the judgment. The environment supports what was said because the environment heard it, and they keep fueling that judgmental fire, which turns into retribution. So I'm wondering, one of the skills it's drills I offer to develop the skills is called the emotional bank account. And that was a 7 Habits of Highly Effective People strategy that Stephen Covey gave me. And it gets to the root of what you're saying. I deposit positives or I take out withdrawals which are negatives, and I have to be aware of the things that people are sensitive to. There's a fairly short list. Honesty is one of them. Trust is one. Vulnerability is another one. Honoring vulnerability. And I've expanded that, and this is also a segue into our next pause at the half hour in talking about the RMP. That's a human desires measurement tool that I co-created to measure more deeply and more organically, who are you? So that we can share that data. If you give me permission, we share that data with colleagues and say, look, this is who I am. I'm very curious. I'm kind of middle ground on a lot of different other things, but I'm hugely curious. I'm going to ask questions. I want to understand. So when I'm in a room with you, the reason I chatter all the time is because I'm driven by my curiosity. I want to know. Now, if that bothers you, please tell me. Or if I had the data about you that says this is a driven, very independent person, not an interdependent person. Yeah, they'll play with the team, but they really want to, when they're serious about their work, they want to get in their office, close the door, and crank it out. So if in my world I knew that about you, and I saw your door closed, and through the window I could see your head down on your desk, I probably shouldn't knock on the door.
Right.
And vice versa. If I was in a big conversation and flowing and creating ideas, it may be beneficial for you, unless the building was on fire, to just leave me alone. So that's my segue for us to briefly talk about this in our pause. Is where is it, Chris, that you want to take your business and your practice? What's the next hurdle, not hurdle, but the next vista for you that you want to go for?
Yeah, that's an excellent question that I recently gained some strong clarity in, and where I think that I can be of the most value is, so I don't know if you know this, but 20 plus years ago, I started my career as a school psychologist, and then ended up going into corporate America not too long after that. But where I think I can bring the most value is working with organizations in helping them, just like I've done work with myself and individuals, peel back those layers. So when we're talking about individuals, we talk about self-awareness. And my clarity and my vision in helping organizations peel back the layers so that we can gain organizational awareness and be intentional about creating cultures of trust, putting the human before the process.
Mm-hmm.
When we do that, the profits will follow. We are in a global crisis of disengaged workers. So how do we fix that? And the way I think that I can help organizations the most is doing needs assessment, needs discovery. But that requires somebody who's trained to know how to find those organizational blind spots. So right now, organizations hire me to do assessments and coaching and custom content workshops. And those are great, and they can be very helpful. But that is not the entire answer. We are still leaving critical pieces covered up that unless we, again, pull back those layers and do that hard work and be intentional about co-creating a solution that works, your organization is going to struggle creating a culture of trust. And you're still going to have those disengaged employees, and there's still going to be conversations that are not happening because people are uncomfortable with confrontation and it's not psychologically safe to speak out.
You're making a great case for the bridge and segue to the next segment, which is mental conditioning, because that focuses on environment. So a follow-up question to what you just said, I'm going to ask you about then in those organizations where you're trying to build those strategies to then create that safe psychological environment. What's your viewpoint on the acculturation process, the onboarding process with new employees? Because now that's potentially a fly in the ointment, that new person coming in. Because they're bringing, on the negative side, they're bringing baggage, they're bringing preconceived notions, despite the fact they're probably hired for what was on paper, a one-dimensional thing, even though I'm not giving credit to all the different ways interviews happen these days with committees and profiling and whatever. But it's still open to discrepancies in the accuracy of who that person is coming in. So in the processes you're applying, what do you recommend for organizations in that particular part of their organization, bringing that new person in?
I think that's a great question. So in the work that I want to do and like to do, it is about taking that 10,000-foot view.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes organizations, insiders can't do it because they're too close to it, right? Which is why you do bring in a consultant. So be impartial and really help you see what is right in front of your eyes, but it's a blind spot to you. So onboarding certainly is one of those areas. And employee recognition is another area. And performance reviews is another area. And internal communications. But to answer your question specifically about onboarding, I think that there needs to be a clear path to what are the things that are going to be mandatory, that, whether it's mandatory training that everyone has, so that people coming in are understanding hey, this is our culture, this is our vision, this is our mission, and guess what? We're going to live it. So we're not going to just say we do these things and never revisit it, but here's how we live it. But that also has to come from leadership, right? So and that is my perspective. Everybody can be a leader from the seat, But if we want transformational change, where people feel psychologically safe, that has to come from the top and has to work its way into all of the different levels of an organization. And so onboarding is a great place to start because you have that opportunity to have that blank slate. These people are new to your organization, and it's a great way to start them off on the right foot.
So
setting them up with a mentor.
So let me ask you something before you get to the mentoring part, Chris. And listen, I want you to give away billable time. You know, we don't want to give too much away. We want them reaching out to you, paying the bill.
But it's all in the implementation.
I'd like that. Yes. But that being said, that you're talking about another word, and I'll just say it outright, accountability. How do you deal with the positive side of holding people accountable?
Love that.
Because look at we're talking about vulnerability. Vulnerability could be impacted negatively in that safe area by then someone at a leadership level flicking the accountability switch because they have to. You know, here's the parameters we all agreed to, and you're not doing what we agreed to. This is not personal. You agreed to this.
Yeah.
I'm just pointing out what you agreed to and asking you why. So how do we handle accountability with and still encourage people to be open?
I think there's two sides to that. There's two sides to that coin, though. So one is the leader who doesn't hold anybody accountable.
Yeah.
And that can be very damaging. And then there's the other side that you just mentioned, the leader that must hold people accountable. If our accountability is aligned with our vision and our mission and it is fair, and we create that environment of psychological safety, and we're creating an environment where we teach people to be not just good givers of feedback, but good receivers, which is a completely different ballgame. We generally, as humans, don't like feedback because it doesn't feel good, and it challenges the story that we tell ourselves in our brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to teach people to be receivers of feedback and have that growth mindset. That's when accountability is a good thing, right? And it needs to be aligned and be fair.
Well, I'm being held accountable, Chris. I'm being held accountable, Chris, because I have to give you some positive feedback because Michelle Hodgson loves you. I just want to let you know that she said that we give you that.
I see that. I love you too, Michelle.
So feel free to identify.
Michelle should be a guest on your.
See back.
Yeah. Michelle should be a future guest.
Yeah.
She is a rock star.
See, we have our own little universe here. We have to recognize this.
Created a globe thing on the She Tribe. Yes, I love it.
So that was a great example for what you were saying about feedback in the technology time, you know, and we're trying to add with technology the face-to-face, and yet, it's not the same as you being in the room, but we come pretty close. So I wanted to make sure we use an example with Michelle as the sharing, the recognizing.
I'm close.
Yeah. All right, so we're at. I'm going to give you another question, leveraging off of what we just went through with our recognizing Michelle and the point that you made about those kinds of interactions with people. And we're in the mental conditioning part, which is the environment. We're talking about the term mental conditioning. It's kind of a misnomer when I start explaining what this segment's about. It's about the influence of environment on your ability to put together skills and maintaining your mindset. So with that being said, what characteristics of an environment, any environment, would enrich someone getting in touch with their vulnerability? And you mentioned some of them in the last comments we've just made.
Yes, so I think part of allowing yourself to be vulnerable is claiming the space, right? So whether that's or you surrounding yourself with people in the right environment that allows you to get things, getting into a close, deep connection with your breath is important.
Mm-hmm.
So taking that time to pause allows you then to speed up. And I love deep breathing exercises because you don't need any special equipment. You can do that anywhere. Having that silence, that solitude, the introspection, you can do that yourself if you are comfortable doing that. Having a coach to guided introspection with you is also helpful. All of those things are important for the mindset of giving yourself that space to be vulnerable. And then I think having a regimented way of asking yourself those tough questions. So I'm sure you heard of the 5 whys.
Yeah.
You can do that with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and I love that because it's a simple thing. Well, you know, why am I scared? Whatever the answer is, I'm scared because I don't want to leave the golden handcuffs. Well, why don't I want to leave the golden handcuffs? You just keep asking why until you get to that root cause where you've now given yourself an honest answer. And then, well, what are you going to do with that answer?
And the other piece I like to add to the whys question is and versus or, so that we stay on the optimistic side of choices rather than the look at, oh, you know, there's always a negative possible too. Well, great, but if you bring it into the discussion, it's got a chance of, you know, manifesting itself. I'm also interested in your points about those suggestions about vulnerability as to focusing on leaders and how they could perhaps ergonomically contribute to support creating a vulnerable space or spaces that allow you to be vulnerable. You know, like with the Googles of the world, they're actually, you know, constructing spaces with these thoughts in mind. You've got a place where you can be alone and it's controlled.
I think that's the future of, you know, when we're talking about brick and mortar. I think that's important in both recruiting and maintaining top talent, especially with millennials. They are looking for that.
Yeah.
They are expecting it. And if you want to be competitive, you better be willing to provide that.
So in your area down there, Chris, in Florida, do you have the galvanizes of the world? You know, those open old warehouse spaces that allows
we have some of that here. Some of that. I don't see. I'm in the Tampa area and born and raised here. It's love my city, beautiful city, and we're just starting to see some of those types of spaces, you know, be provided to workers. I don't think we're as progressive as some of the other larger cities, but we're getting there. I just went to a brand new co-working space in downtown Tampa yesterday that is amazing and has a lot of what people would be looking for in that type of an environment.
The key is, though, does it have a micro brew tap?
No, they had a lot of coffee. They had strawberry flavored water and croissants. And the glass windows that overlook the bay.
There you go.
Just fabulous. I'll give them a plug. Industrious in downtown Tampa, because they're going to be supporting our LinkedIn local event, the first ever in Tampa. So,
and I want you, and the next pause, I want you to talk about that February event so that you get it, because I plugged hashtag the entire state of Florida's major metro area. So I'm hoping that you get some good attendance for that. And just in following up, Galvanize is the big player here in Denver area, and Galvanized has a location in New York and then Southern California, other places. But the formula is what we're talking about, the environmental conditions that business model has struck upon and is attracting the young minds, the millennials, the Z generation, moving forward. And most of the areas of vulnerability for the executives I deal with is in these hiring practices. How can I relate to these young kids? And this is a 40-year-old talking like this. Like they're having trouble relating to them. And I said, well, you've got to.
Well, you know what? It's, you know why people, I just had this conversation with somebody today. We have all this technology and we yearn for connection and we are more disconnected than ever.
Yeah, exactly.
And they forget that, listen, millennials are humans like the rest of us. This is not rocket science. Connect on a human-to-human level. It starts with empathy. Right?
Yeah. And
what do they care about?
And I think, I want you to hold on to the empathy thought about millennials from and not in a listening, in a body language, verbalization, empathy. I mean, there's all different forms of how to be empathic, not empathic, empathetic. I'm an empath, by the way. No,
Actually, both are equally used.
I was making sure the context was properly channeled into my thought, because I have a tendency of going like this, like squirrel kind of thing. So I want to make sure I stay focused. But with that in mind, go ahead and tell people about your event that's coming up, and the sponsors and everybody that's going to be participating and what it's all about.
Yeah, so February 22nd is going to be the first ever LinkedIn local Tampa event. So this movement started in Australia by a young lady named Anna McAfee, who's amazing, and she just had this thought of, hey, why don't we have an event where we meet the people, the users of LinkedIn, and get to know the people behind the profiles. So it's just really a way to connect on a human-to-human level. And it's now gone global, and it's happening in over 100 cities globally. And so I, along with a few other people, are going to be bringing it to Tampa on February 22nd.
Very cool.
Industrious, which is a brand amazing co-working space in downtown Tampa, is one of our partners, and they are giving us that space. And we're finalizing some of the details, but that information for registration will be posted on Eventbrite very, very soon. So we're really excited about this, and we're going to have a number of them throughout the year. And I think the tickets are going to go very, very fast. There's been tremendous interest. I posted it yesterday, and it has already 5,000 views. And
what day of the month is that?
That is a Wednesday evening, and it will be from 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m.
Okay.
Downtown Tampa.
So now that you know about Facebook Live on your account, do a Facebook Live bit, like 2-3 minutes or whatever you want, and pop it up online, and I will pick it up and I'll share it through my network.
All right.
So that you can get get some more pub, and LinkedIn can promote the next one or whatever they want, because I believe there's a connection here with regard to technology to other places, but we've got to talk about it. Like my example with Michelle. Okay, Michelle responded. It was right there in front of me. Now you and Michelle have something to talk about over tea or coffee or whatever. And yet now we can reference that at some later date as examples of how to use this technology in a more human way. And that is the way I'm going to segue into the performance results segment of our show, which talks about what do we want out of this. I don't mean this like what we're doing, but just this from a standpoint, if I open myself up and I become vulnerable and I feel the results of that internally, that it makes me feel better as like my first step, but then I take that good feeling and I see that I can exchange that with coworkers and direct reports, that helps them feel better and they become more productive. What more do you expect from people when they get in touch with their vulnerability, other than that immediate emotional gratification? Where should it go?
I think that is an awesome question, and one that I'm excited to answer. So I wrote an article a while back on how embracing vulnerability can increase your success at work. And so, of course, the first and immediate thing is I'm going to feel better, and my coworkers and I are going to have better relationships. But I think it goes beyond that. So it allows us to not be afraid to put our name in the hat for a promotion, not be afraid to maybe negotiate a better salary offer, not be afraid to ask for a merit increase, not be afraid to be project lead on something that we inherently tell ourselves that we're not good enough to be the project lead on. We so often get in our own way, and it is because we are afraid. We're afraid to show ourselves to the world because, oh my gosh, what will happen if people don't validate and love me and think I'm wonderful? And so we don't bring our best selves and show up every day.
Yeah.
Because as long as we're doing that, we're protecting ourselves, and we don't have to worry if somebody doesn't like it. Oh, if we bring 110% and they don't like it, that's frightening, right? And so I think a connection with someone or how you feel, it opens the doors to opportunity and allows you to dream bigger.
So
You're
let's
no longer afraid to dream bigger.
interject in the character of the woman warrior. Okay, so this is a person who might be a bit confrontational, easy to hold people accountable because they're confident in their ability to do that. But because they're a woman, you know, the B word gets thrown around. Okay, she's just a bitch. You know, I mean, I get paid really well, but boy, working for her is just a pain in the ass. I don't know how to handle it. Well, so when we've got that scenario of level of confidence, how does one take? Because I want you to be a warrior. I want you to be courageous and strong. So vulnerability doesn't necessarily mean weakness. It means opening yourself up enough to know your strengths and where you can excel at. Because the contrary could be also true, or that woman who's a warrior and who has the strength to be able to tell anybody, men or women, they're not on task. You need to work harder. You need to stay true to what we've asked for. They could also be someone, when they see a fuzzy puppy, break into tears, you know, or, you know, cuddle on a drop of a hat. You know, men and women, I'm not excluding this, but my point is that to your comments, getting to know who you are is hugely important beyond the emotions of that good feeling. But what do we use to measure that? Chris, there's so many tools out there.
I think that you are bringing up a lot of what you're making me think of are some very specific emotional intelligence skills. And what I find with the women that I work with is that they are afraid of being perceived as a bitch. They're afraid of being perceived as abrasive or micromanaging. And so I think there's two parts to this equation. Part of it is, as leaders, as women warriors, we need to do the work, right? We need to understand what are the emotional intelligence skills that I'm really strong in and I'm using in a balanced and effective way, and what are the ones that I maybe need to work on. And so for a lot of women, it's really balancing assertiveness with empathy. Those are two sides of the same coin. They need to be balanced. I think the other part of this conversation is we're talking about cultural and social norms. What is it that we expect from women and that we accept that's acceptable from their behavior, and what do we expect from men and what do we find acceptable? And that needs to be an ongoing conversation, because sometimes when women are direct communicators, they are perceived as being bitches. And that shouldn't be. We would never perceive a man in a negative manner for being a direct communicator. I actually have a very good friend who's been very successful in the pharmaceutical industry, and she is a very direct communicator, and had a male manager who in her performance review happened to mention that. Well, those performance reviews internally stay with you forever.
Yeah.
She ends up interviewing for a new position with another male manager, and out of context, this new hiring manager spent 20 minutes in the interview asking her to defend why she was a direct communicator, proceeded to tell her how he didn't want a direct communicator on his team. She didn't get the job for that reason. And so she went back to the original manager who'd written out the performance review and said, you know, I love you. I think you're a great leader, but I'm going to challenge you on this. Have you ever written that in a man's performance review? And kudos to him for admitting that he had not. And it was a learning experience for him when she brought that to his attention. And he was so apologetic that ended up sabotaging an opportunity for her.
Well, and
can you imagine? It would never be perceived negatively for a man to be a direct communicator.
Well, and I think you bring up some discussions that aren't being had but should be, regarding the guy she interviewed with and how he addressed her, and well, not even her, he addressed what was on paper, and more than likely didn't give her much of a clean slate to even, not that she should have. She shouldn't have had to have explained or defended herself. And that discussion right there is on the borderline of not being legitimate interviewing techniques, because it's too far skewed towards the woman.
Right.
So I think there's some education and knowledge from the legal side of things. Companies need to start re-examining their interviewing processes so that the results you want. Now look at if I'm going to be really truthful about the companies I deal with, they're bottom line oriented eventually. They eventually say, how does this impact our bottom line? So that individual's behavior with your friend in that interview impacts our bottom line negatively because you just distracted someone away from their ability to optimize their behavior in performing in their current role. That's not good. And because of your behavior, right, wrong, or indifferent, you now have lost us the opportunity to engage her at a higher level and improve and enrich our future growth. So companies need to have a more detailed dialogue about what they discover. And I think we might have just lost Chris. I'm going to have to add her back real quick. So take a pause for a minute, people. We're almost done with the show. I'm going to give you a bit of a break. There she is, back so quickly. That's okay. I'm glad you're back.
All of a sudden you were frozen and gone.
So,
Sorry about that.
so tell me what your thoughts are on what the question or the comments I just made, and I'm going to ask you a closing question to end our time for today.
Okay, so I'm not sure what I missed there. Can you just give me like a 10-second
Yeah,
recap of what you just said?
Basically, it's that the community at large corporately needs to have a meeting of the minds with their legal, their leadership at all levels, and explain to them, look, when you interview somebody internally or from an external source, you have information at your fingertips that allows you to be judgmental. You need to put that on hold. You need to look at what is the contribution potentially that person's going to make to our future.
Yeah.
Because on an internal candidate, they're currently influencing what we do right now.
Right.
And that gentleman
I think,
distracted your friend.
So much opportunity for improvement at an individual leadership and organizational level, and this goes back to blind spots, right? So if you bring in a consultant like myself who's observing interviewing practices and hiring practices, because it's not just one thing, right? We can't just do a trust workshop and expect that everybody's going to now have this wonderful culture of trust that will help raise awareness and it will help with specific behaviors, but there's so much more that can be done, whether it's onboarding, hiring, recruiting, employee recognition programs, performance reviews, etc. So sometimes we're too close to see it. But yes, there needs to be a conversation between all of the key stakeholders so that we are raising individual self-awareness. We are using the skills of reality testing. So are we jumping to conclusions and making assumptions?
This time, Chris, if you can hear me, you've frozen up a little bit on me. We're going to continue to kind of watch this a little bit and see if I can bring you back real quick. The nice thing is, Chris, you froze in a very good place. Okay, as we're waiting for Chris to come back with us, let me just point out to you that the things we've talked about regarding assessment and measuring performance in an environment, in a culture where you want to build trust and have that psychologically safe place is hugely important. But many times the gaps that continue to exist with organizations and the individuals that lead them are there because there's not this continuous string of contact points to hold people accountable within the organization. And one of those ways you can do that without ruffling people's feathers and being personal about it is using good data that measures behavior. Chris has some tools that she's mentioned she uses, and then there's the one tool that I have talked to you about in the past called the RMP. It's a human desires assessment tool that looks at human desires and evaluates them at a very organic level to identify what drives you and gives you the rationale for understanding why are you here. and what's happening with your world. And I'm still trying, people, to get Chris back on the line with us. And she can hear me. I know that for a fact. So we'll stick with it. She'll join us up here shortly, I hope, and give us a shout so we can say a pleasant and appropriate goodbye to her for today. It's been a great show. We've been talking about women warriors and their vulnerability. How do they stay in touch with that, as Chris has told us, and open up to the best of what and who they are? Because opening up allows them to get into a place that is comfortable and secure with them. We talked about with Chris different points of view regarding tools and skills that they can deal with. One of those skills was, as the song says, breathing. And we're coming up to 12 o'clock and are saying goodbye to you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm glad we had so many great, wonderful people touching base with us on Facebook Live and taking a look at what we do about performance. And I'm going to try to bring in Chris real quick so that
Just like the cold out on the water.
there we go.
Blow you back to me.
Okay.
There she is.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. That's okay.
Whole phone just
So
went dead.
so
I
in
lost you.
tell me this, Chris. What would you like our listeners and viewers to take away from today regarding discovering their vulnerability as those wonderful warriors out there in the world?
That there is so much power in vulnerability. Not to think of vulnerability as weakness, but that is really where your power lies. And that is where honesty and authenticity live. And when you are able to be vulnerable, it allows you to dream bigger and to think bigger. And they're powerful. And when you do that, sky is the limit. Your vision is in front of you. You have clarity. And then it just requires commitment and action.
Chris, thank you so much for connecting with me and moving our relationship one more step down the road. I'm so glad we've connected, and look forward to wonderful conversations in the future, and extending that to more sharing and discovering things. So have a great weekend, would you please?
You too. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry for the technical
Oh,
difficulties.
don't worry about it. It's part of the deal. Have a great day today.
Thanks, Lola. Good to see you.
Well, everybody, we're still on the air with a couple of things, but we're going to end right now with our song, our emblem song that we always take off with, and that's Breathing. And so you can take a listen to that. I'm so glad you were here with me today, out there in the international world. Make sure you breathe, people. Stay on top of it, and be aware of where you're at all times, and appreciate the people around you.